Before we begin, I'd like to request Pragati Oswal to begin with giving flowers to Dr. Kapila Vatsyan. She's sitting there. Pragati, will you please give flowers to Dr. Sam Pitroda? I must add that they've all been dear, dear friends and more than that, mentors to the foundation. They've held us at every step. Thank you so much. Flowers for Dr. Sudarshan Agarwal, the chairman of Shruti Foundation. We are not able to do anything without his guidance. He's so loving. He's such a great mentor. Thank you so much. And flowers for the man without whom Shruti Foundation would not exist. Shri Suresh Nivatya. It's because of him that I started the foundation.
She's called me Amma, so I suppose that I am therefore empowered to publicly tell the daughter that I seem to be all right. I don't see you, that's a different matter. All my great friends on the dais, and if I name them all, it will take a long, long time. Dr. Karan Singh, Sam, Sudarshan ji, Suresh Nivatya ji, brothers, and everybody. And naturally, Shruti. But do I say I'm not competent to give any blessings? The blessings and the Ashish Vachan and the appropriate mantra and the shlok will come from my dear, and if I may call you brother, and someone who lives the eternal wisdom of this country enshrined in words, but more enshrined in that which is the name of someone who calls herself my daughter, namely Shruti. And Dr. Karan Singh will no doubt, with that wisdom and experience and with the vibrations of the mother and the meaning of the internal meaning of that song which was sung. Not in accordance exactly, but carrying on the tradition of that seer Sri Aurobindo, the Vande Mataram. The Vande Mataram encapsulates this, not this little mother that is being called, but that mother of this earth of India, that mother which has held us together despite all the ups and downs and upheavals of our mundane living. And if this conference and everything that the foundation stands for can re-invoke the spirit which is the word Shruti itself, because Shruti came before Smriti. And that word, Shruti, is that vibration which has enabled us, the articulated sound without the written word, which has enabled us to sustain this culture. There are many dimensions, and my dear friend and brother Sam and I were talking about this a minute ago. Conferences like this move on different planes as they must, and all of you coming from different parts of the world. But being in this part of the world and on this earth, may I say that those parts and that eternal continuity of the Shruti of this culture may sustain you and bless you. Who am I? Thank you.
We will try to live up to the meaning that you have just explained to us and strive in spite of our feelings to serve the self which is all of us together, and to see how we can do our little bit to change the state of the recognition of who we are as people and how we are as a collective and how we can live together in harmony. I will again delay my longer introduction to the Congress because I know my friend Sam Petroda has to leave in a few minutes. So I think I'll be giving the introduction right at the end, but I request him to now come and talk about what he thinks about mentoring. We've been talking a lot about this, and I look forward to his thoughts.
Thanks, Shruti. Kapila ji, Dr. Karan Singh, Suresh Bhai, Mr. Agrawal, Shruti, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a special privilege to be here with all these distinguished people to talk a little bit about mentoring. I met Shruti just about 2 years ago, and I was quite impressed with a student of mathematics interested in all kinds of culture, music. As I got to know her, she and I started talking about teachers. And I find that on one hand, there is a need to preserve a lot of this Indian heritage, culture, art. And on the other hand, there are all kinds of new tools which are essentially replacing old methods and bringing new ways of doing things. I remember about 20 years ago, a friend of mine told me that there are 12,000 herbal medicinal plants which are unique to Indian climate, which I didn't know anything about. I was quite impressed, but at the same time I was concerned that we had no documentation on it. So he and I decided to work together to really document 12,000 herbal medicinal plants using pretty fancy, complicated computers and databases and scientific discovery and all that. At that point in time, nobody was willing to fund. No one in India would give you a dime to really document Indian heritage. Finally, we got some funding from Danish government. Started our work almost 20 some odd years ago. Today, we have documented all of the 12,000 herbal medicinal plants. We have almost 200 doctors and scientists and engineers working in the institute. And we have great deal of funding from Indian sources to really take this thing forward. The message is anything to do with tradition, you don't get funding that is required. So when we started talking about teachers training, we said because of IT, because of internet, learning models are changing rapidly. And as a result, we need to relook at the role of teacher. In the process, we need to go back to the tradition. Today, teacher essentially creates content and delivers content. With internet, web, content is essentially available on the net, created by best of the best in the world, and you can get that content delivered in multiple ways, anytime, any place, in any form you want. So what is the role of the teacher? And that's when Shruti started talking about traditional education, the role of guru. And I saw a great deal of fit here. So I said, it'll be good to really redefine the role of a teacher more in terms of a mentor. But all of the teachers today are not really trained to be mentors. They're basically trained to deliver content and create content. So when you look at millions of teachers in schools, you realize that they really lack basic skills required to be a mentor. So what does it mean to be a mentor? So she and I worked on a few ideas and really defined 12 verticals. To begin with, self. We said mentor will have to really specialize and understand these 12 different verticals and detach themselves from content and delivery and focus on really students' ecosystem, focus on giving comfort and really providing confidence that many of the students today lack. So we have designed several modules. We are exploring ways and means to bring this to a trial level. And there I believe role of technology is going to be very critical. I was talking to Minister of Education this morning and I said, most of our teachers today do not know enough about web, IT, technology and utility. I am not talking about teachers in rural India. I am talking about even teachers in urban India, in best of the best engineering schools, even at IITs. Most of the professors are really not equipped to understand social media, use of all of it in really enhancing education. So we are working together in really fine-tuning this idea of transforming teachers to mentors, designing programs and tools and techniques to really change their orientation, because the task is huge. You got to take millions and millions of teachers all over the world and say that in the next decade you got to change completely. This whole business of student-teacher ratio of 10 to 1 or 20 to 1 don't make sense anymore. Today we have a national knowledge network which connects 1500 nodes to 40 gigabit bandwidth to connect all our universities, all our colleges, major parts of our libraries and all of the R&D institutions. But we just don't know how to use it. Because people are really not used to this kind of bandwidth. Just to give an idea, on 23rd of January, along with Dr. Michael Sandel, a friend of mine from Harvard University, he and I would be addressing 250,000 students at the same time. And we will have interactive communication with all 250,000. Now that's a very powerful tool. How do you use this kind of a tool? How do we get these distinguished people to come in and interact with thousands and thousands of students? Earlier version would have been that Michael Sandel comes here and talks to a class of 400 or 50. So the mentoring also requires scaling. So we are in the process of designing this toolkit, content for mentoring, and then we want to use web to really transform teachers. We also want to look at developing an exchange where someone could log in from Bihar and said, I want to be a mentor. What do I do? Who will teach me? And the teacher may turn out to be a 12-year-old young kid who will be teaching computer skills to a 65-year-old teacher. These are the challenges that I see in taking technology forward. I am convinced that the education system is going to change completely in the next decade. If I was to build a university of 2030, it will definitely not look like Cambridge, Delhi University or Harvard. It may not even have a campus. That doesn't mean everything is going online. But the class may be conducted at shopping center, restaurant, Starbucks, retail shops. The meaning of classroom is going to change completely. And can our teachers cope with these kinds of ideas? The biggest resistance comes from teachers' union. They don't want any change. They think these are all wild ideas that will not scale. But believe me, it is already happening. It's happening on a big scale. And if we are not really prepared for it, I don't think we'll be able to take advantage of the potential of technology. IT is definitely changing learning models, learning patterns, content, delivery, and as a result, roles and relationships between students, teachers, administrators, and all of that. Education is no longer about duster, blackboard, chalk, teacher, textbook, exam, grade, certificate. There is no need to get a certificate existing from an institution. You may need to get a certificate entering an institution. So these are all wild ideas. I don't think systems are ready to accept. So our goal jointly is to really develop this program for mentoring. She knows a lot more about wellness and self than I do. So I agreed to collaborate with her on taking the technology piece across and creating a platform where we can begin to create special content to convert teacher to mentor. Because I believe this is going to be a huge need in the country. Nobody is paying attention to it. Today, teacher means go get a B.Ed. Doesn't mean anything anymore. And teacher doesn't even understand the kind of tools available today in the marketplace. I work with a lot of young and I experiment with some of these things like Twitter. So I had my first press conference on Twitter, which was a wild idea. Nobody had ever done it. Now we are working on taking 12th plan of the government and putting it on social media. That's an innovation. You know, most of the plans of the government are in 3 big volumes about that thick, and they print several thousand copies and give it to most of the government officers. Maybe 5% of the people read it, 2% of people understand it, and it remains within a very small group. Average Indian doesn't know what this 12th plan is all about. And our job is to take that 12th plan and put it on social media so you can reach out to people. Don't underestimate the power of all these tools, even in India today. Even though you have a very small population today, which is going to increase substantially in the next 3 to 5 years to hundreds of billions, it is indeed a very powerful new tool. So how do we use these tools to create mentors is our challenge. I look forward to working with Shruti on this. I'm sure we have a lot of hard work ahead of us, and we'll also have a lot of people to convince. Unfortunately, I have a press conference at 4 o'clock. On Twitter? Not on Twitter. I'm sort of doing something. I don't even know what I'm doing. But you know, I'm like a robot. Okay? My office winds me up and I just appear there and they say do something, so I do that. You know, so Sukhmani is here and she's going to tell me in the car what I'm supposed to do. And I'm supposed to also make sense at the end of the day. So when I came here, I was told, but I knew about this program, that I have about 15 minutes to speak and we'll have to rejuggle the schedule. So Shruti, thanks for accommodating. I appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you. I look forward to working with you on developing mentorship program. And I wish you all good luck at this conference. And I hate to leave, but I gotta go. Thank you.
So, with your permission, I will continue now. Wholeness is that, wholeness is this. From wholeness, wholeness emerges. If out of wholeness we produce wholeness, wholeness indeed remains. Om. Peace, peace, peace. And I believe this is what innately we are born with, a feeling of wholeness, a feeling of that which we are produced out of, being whole as well. I remember when I was a child, I felt I was going to live forever, and that everything was pure, and everything was beautiful, and life was beautiful, and parents were beautiful, and friends were beautiful, and cousins were beautiful, and nature was beautiful, and everything was purna, whole. And then somewhere along the way you start looking at something that doesn't look too whole, and doesn't look too pure, and doesn't look so beautiful. And then you question things, and then you wonder, and then you feel pain, and then you feel a lot of confusion with the pain. And that keeps growing as you grow older, somehow. And then there's a battle between that inner truth or feeling. It couldn't have been false, we were born with it. And what you see outside, in relationships, in life, in suffering, in waves of excitement and sadness and heartbreak and enthusiasm and so many mixture of experiences and feelings, and you wonder about purnata or completeness or wholeness. And somewhere along the line this word learning and education comes along ever since we are born. So we first learn from our immediate environment, from our parents and our home and what we see around us, from nature around us, from the streets, whether they're dirty or clean, from the dogs on the road, and we learn from everything around us. So that's our first learning. And then we come to this wonderful big concrete school where it's difficult to get admission, but somehow your parents struggle and you get admission, and there you've made it. And then you're made to sit on a chair for many hours and made to learn something that you're forced to make sense out of. There's something inner that struggles with it, but then because everybody is doing it, you think that's the right thing to do. And you learn and you get confused, and then you get used to learning that way, so you think that's right. And so, from a very young age, we begin to live a narrative reality, where the reality is shaped by a large group of individuals who tell you that this is the way to be, this is the way to learn, this is the way to think of yourself as a girl versus how your brother should think of himself. This is the way your mother has to be. If she's crying, it's okay. If your uncle or somebody else shouts at your aunt, it's okay, because that's the way it is. So these are many learnings that we have ever since we are born, in school, outside school, that there can only be one answer to a mathematical problem, because that's what somebody said. So we're living in a narrative reality, that you will be in prison if you don't watch a red light. Everything that we think is real and true is a narrative reality, and that's our learning ever since we are born. So it's been a question mark as I've been growing up, experiencing, enjoying failure and success both. And more and more, what I realize is that everything that I enjoy in myself and people in different parts of the world, parts of the world enjoy of me, most of the things that I speak of, that I experience, that I exude out of myself are not those things that I learned in school. If I sing and people enjoy it, it was not that I learned it in school. If I talk about the Upanishads and I feel the joy of the truth between the self and the cosmos and life and the spirit, I certainly didn't learn it in school. I was asked to become a visiting research fellow in anthropology at Queen's University in the UK. And I never learned anthropology in school and college. It's only because I studied culture and people on my own. So what was school for? I wonder. The only thing I think that I really gained out of school was a fantastic mathematics teacher. Because till class 4, I was sitting in the back row looking out of the window, and I used to come 33rd out of 34 children. That was the rank I had. Until this wonderful teacher in class 5 suddenly noticed that this girl is not doing well because she's not there. And she asked me to come up and sit in front of her. And that's the class in which we started geometry, algebra and mathematics. And by the end of the year, I topped the class in mathematics. But it was only because of the care and the mentoring of that one teacher. So it was not the system that made me good. It was that one teacher who made me love education and made me love to learn. So today, and for quite a few years now, I truly believe that learning does not happen out of a building and out of a curriculum. Learning happens out of relationships. It happens out of great relationships between the sharing, between two people. They may be the same age. The mentor might be younger than the mentee. It's not age bound either. We can learn from a tree. We can learn from a human being. We can learn from a baby. I learn from my grandson all the time. He's not even 3. But when I was the first one he looked at, because I helped deliver him. He was 15 minutes old when he first looked at me. And he looked at me and he smiled. And his smile said, "I know you from somewhere else." And that was the first communication between me and my grandson, even before his mother saw him. So I believe that learning is about relationships. It's about relationships between people. It's about relationships between us and the cosmos. It's our relationship with how we observe things in nature. It's amazing. This very simple thing was said to a son by a father, Varuna, said to Bhrigu in the Taittiriya Upanishad. Upanishads are age-old texts in Indian culture. And this ideal child, ideal student, went to his father, who was his teacher, and he said, "Tell me the way to true learning, to the truth." And he said, "You can only learn through the assimilative doors of your consciousness. And one of the assimilative doors is your physical self, which is a combination of your physical ability, your physical desire. So you call it annam, that which is consumable. So all the physical consumable, understand the truth of it. And that's the way to learn. Understand the life energy around you, in you, which sustains you. Pranam. Understand the world through sight, chakshu, inner sight and outer sight. Understand the world through true hearing and reception, shrotram. Understand the world through mana, the mind, the sense mind in us. And then finally, understand the world through all vibrations of speech, or rather communication, because communication is not only through audible speech. There can be communication through various ways. So understand the world through communication. And if you use these 5 assimilative doors to your consciousness, but if you understand the source from where these 5 assimilative doors come, so go beyond these 6 doors and go to the source of each. And once having reached the source of where sight comes from, the source of where hearing comes from, the source of where communication comes from, the source of where desire comes from, once you have gone backwards to the source and then have been able to merge these together, only then will you know Brahman, which is the divinity in you. So I believe this teaching is eternal because it will never grow old, because this relates to our mind, our senses, our body, our being, our relationship with ourself, within and without. And I must tell you that if you ever care to read these texts, you will see that they apply for all time. So in this Congress, this is the 3rd Congress that we are having. We started in 2011. And in this Congress, I felt that the most important thing to address is to look at each one of us simultaneously as the guru and the learner. And to look at how we, in this engagement, can be the facilitators of today and tomorrow towards the wholeness of learning, the wholeness of teaching or training, Purna Talim. How can Purna Talim happen? Nobody makes it happen, but we can be part of a process together which can enable it in our societies in which we live. And in that quest for Purna Talim, how does every student who is also naturally a teacher or a learner or a giver of knowledge, how does each one first have to address the self and the planes and parts of one's being? How does one have to understand what well-being really means? And what is the well-being of the individual and the well-being of society before one can truly become a good mentor? And then once a person wants to become a guru or a mentor, technology comes afterwards. That's just a tool which we use. Yeah? Just like I'm using a mic to reach out to you. So that's a tool. But how can you create that sense of light within a person's heart when you speak or when you share knowledge? How can you sustain that light, which is more important? Very often we create light and then you go out and you say, oh, but I don't have time for it. How can you sustain that light, and how can you sustain it long enough so that it becomes a fire and a passion of transformation? That's the question. And so to deal with that question, we don't have adequate tools, definitely not in a conference. It has to be out there in life. But we're just attempting to get like-minded people together so that we can share our thoughts and then go out in the world and try to practice it in reality in whatever way we can. So what we're attempting in this Congress is, over the next 2 days, is to have 9 basic areas of engagement through some panel discussions. And in that, what we're looking at first is Swayam, the self. We are also looking at Swasthya, well-being. We are looking at expression, Vak, which means communication, the role of language, the role of the arts in learning, in cognition, and indeed, is there any separation between the arts and the sciences? And if there is not, then why have we created this separation? You know, is it just different ways of looking at the same thing? If you're looking at life, music can be looked at as mathematics, or it can be looked at as a harmonious art. Both are true. Frequency is mathematics, beat is mathematics, everything is mathematics in music. So how is it not science? Why is it an art? So we have to look at those questions as well. And then we really need to look at indigenous ways of learning, of excellence, pedagogy. I mean, how did people retain knowledge without text, without computers, without any recording of knowledge for centuries in India? What was the technology of accessing the mind that a child who learned something at the age of 6 could remember it for the rest of her or his life? So what was that way of accessing the brain through various assimilative doors again of the mind, you know? We have Gardner talking about multiple intelligence, and then after a few years he says, no, but now I've rediscovered multiple intelligence and now I've evolved it even further. But we had it not in those words, but we said, okay, do it musically, do it in Chanda. If you want to learn shipbuilding, or you want to learn mathematics, or you want to learn grammar, do it in intonation so that you access your musical mind at the same time. And do it in Chanda, so you access your mathematical mind at the same time. And do it in relationship with your Guru, so that there is an exchange. And then repeat it again and again and understand the meaning, so that there is an inner strengthening of that knowledge. And repeat it 108 times, so that it goes into your long-term memory. So this is how one of the ways of pedagogy that was there, is there even today, but not in our mainstream education. So we need to look at these things. We need to look at relationships and how relationships create learning, true learning. We need to look at various ways. कैसे सीखते हैं हम? सीखने को क्या बोलते हैं? What do we mean by learning? Yeah? And then we need to look at the element of discovery, khoj, in education. We've lost discovery in our education system because we are meant just to remember what is in a book. There's no experimentation except in a little laboratory somewhere in the school. So we need to look at the element of experimentation, khoj, invention. Earlier in homes, children were inventors all the time. Even today in villages, you have so many new inventions all the time. So we need to look at these things. And then we need to look at leadership. We need to look at netritva, vision in society. And how a visionary doesn't have to become 50 before he becomes a visionary. Even a child is a visionary. And then finally, we need to look at a very, very dangerous thing today in society, assessment and evaluation. Because everything works backwards from that. Depending on how a board of education assesses you, what marks you get, what grades you get, that seals your life at the age of 18 or 21, and you then become a product or a victim of how you have been assessed by, again, a narrative reality. So we need to revisit, very seriously revisit this narrative reality, which forces us to change our innate sense of self to a narrative sense of self. So these are some of my concerns, and indeed the concerns of many, many friends who are here with us today. And Dr. Karan Singh, I would invite you, with all your years of experience, to throw some light on how we can go forward from here. And now I request him to give the presidential address. Before that, I'd just like to say that today, after this, we have a very, very interesting plenary session where we have Dr. Aruna Roy, Dr. Dinesh Singh, Dr. Sonal Man Singh, Ravi Gulati, whose children you saw performing here a little while ago, the founder of Manzil. We also have with us Prakhar, who started a youth alliance and has influenced thousands of youth and is working with them to try and create change with the youth. So we wanted the youth connection today so that we can hear from them what they feel about learning. And so we look forward to all of you being with us and your friends through that session. Then we have a very interesting, or I shouldn't say interesting, I think you will all be really, really infused with the beauty of sound, with the concert of Pandit Rajan Sajan Mishra. And after that we have dinner today. And then tomorrow onwards, we are not here, we are at the India Habitat Center, and there we will be having our panels, our panel discussions with, again, very, very good speakers from India and from the various countries. Many of them are returning friends. They've been with us since 2011, and I really thank you from the heart for being here with us. And on the last day, we're going to be together until lunch, where we will review all that we have shared and look at what we can come up with together so that we can go back to our respective countries and try and share with people who are institutional heads, who are policy makers, who are learners, who are mentors, share with everybody what we feel and what we would like to work together for, to try and change a little bit if we can. Thank you. Dr. Karan Singh, may I invite you.
Om Bhadram Karnevihi Shinuyam Deva Bhadram Pashyam Akshabhiryatraha Sthirairangai Sushubhanushasanu Vivyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu Swastina Indro Vridhashavaha Swastina Pusha Vishwaveda Swastina Starakshorarishthanemi Swasti no Brihaspati Radhatu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Chairman of the Shruti Foundation, Dr. Sudarshan Agarwal, Suresh Nyotia ji, Shruti, who is the life and soul of the entire organization, Kapila ji, Lukesh ji, distinguished delegates to this Congress from India and from abroad, our young friends who are part of Shruti's team, who are so full of vibrancy and so full of enthusiasm, and other friends in the audience. From Shruti's introduction, it is clear that the Congress seeks to cover nothing less than the entire human condition in a day and a half, which is going to be really quite a feat. Because of the many dimensions that she has mentioned, each one is important, each one has to be looked into in some detail. I suppose the most one can do in a meeting like yours is to simply highlight the major areas where further work needs to be done. This is the third We Ask conference that I have had the privilege of attending. And this time Shruti has chosen a very intriguing and somewhat unusual title, Self-Wellness Mentoring. So my task is to try and see how these three can be linked with each other, or what is in fact the psychic or spiritual or intellectual or emotional link between them. Let us start with the self. Now the concept of the self, of course, varies widely from civilization to civilization. In our civilization, in the Hindu civilization, our self is certainly not our body, it's not our mind, it's not our emotions. It is essentially the deeper spiritual entity that we encapsulate. We believe that within each individual, each human being, there is a spark of the divine. And that fanning that spark into the blazing fire of spiritual realization is the highest goal of human activity. Now therefore the self becomes something very deep and very profound. And of course this varies. We call it the Atman. In Western tradition it's known as the soul. Some traditions believe that it is immortal, some believe that it is not, it is evanescent. I'm not going into the theology of this. But I think it's important that each one of us realize what our true nature is. What is that within us that is indestructible? That is what the Upanishads are all about. These glorious texts that Shruti mentioned. They are, I think they represent the high water mark not only of Indian philosophy, but of world philosophy. And they deal with the Brahman, the all-pervasive divine, and the Atman, the spark of that divine within each human being, within each person, within each object, and how they can be joined. So I think that without going into the theology, I think first thing we've got to realize when we talk of the self, that we have to move towards an integrated idea of the self. That would include the physical, that would include the emotional, that would include the intellectual, and that would include the spiritual. There are at least these four dimensions of human existence which have to be integrated if our self is really to become an instrument either of learning or of teaching. So some idea of the holism involved in the concept of the self and an inclusiveness. There are some philosophies which disregard the body. That's wrong. If Sujata had not come at that critical juncture, the Buddha would have died of starvation. And one of the greatest teachers of the world would have been lost forever. So simply torturing the body or misusing the body is counterproductive. The mind has to be trained to become clear and creative. The emotions have to be trained. The emotions are among the least understood dimensions of the self. We tend to look upon the emotion as something, that's an emotional reaction. Well, that is perhaps the most fundamental reaction. And perhaps that is the thing that really drives our activities, and ultimately illuminating it all, the self. Francis Thompson has a marvelous poem, Not Where the Wheeling Systems Darken, and our not where the wheeling systems darken and our being soars, the drift of pinions would we hearken, beats at our own clay-shuttered doors. The angels keep their ancient places. Turn but a stone and start a wing. 'Tis ye, 'tis your estranged faces that miss the many-splendid thing. The many-splendid light of the Atman, the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world, the Nur and Rohani of the Sufis, the Ek Onkar of the Sikhs, that is the light which illuminates our self. So when we talk of the self, I think we have to begin with a much more profound, a much more inclusive, a much more comprehensive notion of what we are and what capacities there are within us and what therefore we can achieve. So much for the self. I'm not going to go on about the self. Is one of my favorite topics, although it involves a certain arrogance to talk about the self at all, because you're talking as if you're a master of the self. One isn't, but one is a student of the self. And I find the self constantly surprises one. You surprise yourself. I surprise myself all the time. So it isn't something that is fixed, it's something that is creative. It's something that is evanescent, something that is powerful. So we start with a holistic self, and this links very closely with the second concept of wellness. Because what is wellness? See, wellness is a very good term. I think it's a better term than health. But I remember I was Minister for Health at one stage, in one of my previous incarnations in this life, and the WHO definition of health was physically fit, mentally acute and socially integrated. I pointed out at the WHO meeting that applied perfectly to a pack of wolves. They are physically very fit, they are very acute intellectually, and they are beautifully integrated, they hunt together. But is that what we mean by health? Where is the missing dimension? The missing dimension, of course, is the self, the spiritual and the emotional and the intellectual dimension. So, wellness involves the nurturing of all these various dimensions of the human personality. It's not only, physical health is very important, mind you. Sharira madhyam khalu dharma sadhanam. The Shastra says that the body itself is the basis of all dharma. But just the body and just the wellness and fitness of the body is not by itself enough. As I said, to have real wellness, one has to access or address these various components of the self, if you are to get to a feeling or a state of wellness. And wellness, I feel, is something more than simply physical good health. It is a totality of the personality that has to be developed. Also, it revolves around happiness. Bhutan has given us the concept of gross national happiness, which is a sort of a alternative to gross national whatever it is product. You're in business, you know, GDP. Gross national product is fine as long as it doesn't collapse one day, or as long as the multi-billionaires are not taken off in handcuffs because they've looted the nation. But gross national happiness is something which is a much better idea. What is it that makes people happy? I think a realization, an understanding of the self, and the feeling of wellness are essential in happiness. And wellness can be accessed in many ways. We have to move towards it. Yoga, at least the physical yoga is there, meditation is there, prayer is there. There are many yogas which we have in our tradition. We have to use. Yoga comes, as you know, from the same root as the word to yoke, to join. Yoga is the methodology and technology whereby the divine within is joined with the all-pervasive divine. and there are many different methodologies of doing that. But the whole concept of yoga is not simply physical fitness. And if you can stand on your heads, congratulations. But the capacity to stand on one's head is not a prerequisite for spiritual illumination. Then let me come to the third concept, the linked concept of mentoring. Now, mentoring is something which Shruti has been very, very keen on for a long time. And Sam, who is himself a great mentor, Sam is a remarkable man. He's left now. He's full of ideas, full of dynamism. He's given us some of the ways in which technology is transforming the very way that we live, transforming our very lives. But the concept of mentoring, I think, is something that we have to rediscover. We have very good technology, and maybe the mentor may become now irrelevant, because if you are mentored through a machine, you may not need a human being. But we are still old-fashioned enough to feel that a mentor has to be, if possible, a human being, at least maybe for the rest of this century, if not forever. And we have had this ancient concept in India of the guru. Now, the guru is a popular word in the West, but people don't understand the full concept of the guru. The word guru means one who removes the darkness, who shows you the light. There are beautiful shlokas about the guru. Akhanda mandalakaram vyaptam yena jarajaram tatpadam darshitam yena tasmai shri guruve namaha. That divine force that permeates this entire universe, the one who shows us a glimpse of that divine force is the Guru. There are beautiful ideas about the Guru. Agyantimirandhasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshurun militam yena tasmai shri guruve namaha. He who with the collyrium of wisdom removes the darkness of ignorance from our eyes. That is the definition of a Guru. So, Guru is really somebody. He who removes the darkness of ignorance from our eyes with the surma, collyrium of wisdom. Agyantimirandhasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshurum militam yena tasmai shri guruve namaha. So, the idea of the Guru is one who shows the way. The Guru cannot do the work that the mentee is supposed to do. I had a Guru who used to say that a Guru is like a finger pointing at the moon. He can give you the direction, but if you hang on to the finger, you will never get there. And a lot of the Guru-vas that is now going on in India, I don't want to criticize anybody, but a lot of Guru-vas is hanging on to the finger rather than going in the direction in which that finger is pointing. And that's why you have various cults and so on. As long as they are helpful, certainly they are helpful to millions of people. But there is always a danger of their becoming ends in themselves rather than a means towards a goal. So mentoring involves essentially guiding with love and affection. Every parent is a mentor. Every teacher is expected to be a mentor, although it's a very, very big challenge for teachers to become mentors because they do not have the background, they are not taught, they have not been brought up to be mentors. But nonetheless, as Sam pointed out, to convert teachers into mentors is one of the big tasks of human civilization in this century. He talked of 12 verticals, I talked of 4 pillars of learning. I mentioned that last time very briefly. The UNESCO International Commission on Education in the 21st century identified, I was a member of that, 4 pillars of learning. Learning to know, the Jnana Yoga, learning to do, the Karma Yoga, learning to live together, the Saha Yoga, and learning to be. I think for the first time, Atma Yoga, for the first time in an international document, the concept of learning to be was was there. And the name of the report is Learning the Treasure Within. So that's, I think, a very profound concept. And the fact that UNESCO adopted that report is I think, significant. So therefore, we have these three concepts that Shruti has developed for this conference. We have concept of the self, the concept of wellness, and the concept of mentoring the group. And what you will have to do, I think, is to juggle these three in the course of the next year and a half and see where they land and how they can illuminate the recesses of your mind and consciousness. I would like to congratulate the Shruti Foundation and Shruti personally for all that they are doing. Sometimes I think they are biting off more than they can chew. She's starting yet another organization today, about which she'll tell you later. I've been telling her, for God's sake, concentrate. Do not spread yourself too wide, because that is everybody's personal decision. Because there's so much to be done. We have to build a coalition of positivity in this world. There is so much negativity. There are the arms smugglers, and there are the human traffickers, and there are the harbingers of hate and religious bigotry, and there are forces that flourish on negative views. So as against this very powerful coalition of the negative, we have to build a coalition of the positive. A coalition of those people and those organizations and those groups around the world who are working, and there are many. And I think one of the big things that could be done is if through our networking, through technological networking, there could be as it were, a network of light around the world. Previously, the wisdom came from one big light, one messiah or one text. Now I think it's going to be different. Now we need to cover the world with a lattice of light, with points and points, little points of light, until ultimately the whole world is covered with this net. And I think that what you are doing, Shruti, is another link in this huge chain, or this huge lattice, this huge network around the world, which is now needed more than ever before. We are living in an age of great challenge and great responsibility. The old is dying, the new is struggling to be born, and we find ourselves caught uneasily between a disappearing past and an indeterminate future. Yes, but the dance of Shiva is exactly that. You have the dance of Shiva, which is the dance of creation. It is a dance of recreation. It has all the elements in it. One day one can do a whole seminar on the dance of Shiva. I don't remember the words in Savitri, I know the words in the Sanskrit. Nityavasane natarajarayam nanada dhakkam nava panchamaram uddhartu kaman sanagadi siddhan heta vivashe shivasutrajanam. So, what I'm trying to say is that we're living in one of those great eras of change. And we're very, very fortunate to be living in an era like this. Because when you live in an era that is stultified, that is static, then there's nothing you can do. What can an individual do? But in this era today, when everything is becoming malleable, everything is becoming liquid, an individual can do a lot. And I think, I know that there are people in this room and there are people we know who, as individuals, have done a great deal to try and bring some positivity. To conclude, I don't want to go into, I've already, I think, exceeded what I wanted to say. I think there are two dimensions of our lives. One is the horizontal dimension in which we interact with the world around us. Like you are doing, like we are all doing. We interact with, whether it is intelligentsia, whether it is education, whether it is business, whatever it is, we interact with. Second is the vertical dimension, where we interact with our deeper selves. I think both are necessary. When Vivekananda founded the Ramakrishna mission, he gave them a simple mantra: Atmanamokshartham Jagat Hitaya Cha. Work for the salvation of your soul, but also for the welfare of society. I think we've got to do both. And whatever we can do in the very limited spans that we have of life, Even our Vedic span was 100 years, by the way. And 100 years was the ideal span of life. Jeevema Sharada Shatam. And when we became independent, it was 29 years. Today it is 72 years in India. And the Europeans live longer. And therefore have more to contribute. But the point is that whatever time we have, we should try and make a contribution towards the emerging global consciousness in our own ways. And I think that is the very purpose of your seminar and the work that you do. So I'll end again with a prayer to the goddess, because in our tradition the goddess is the source of power, Shakti. She is the one who gives us the knowledge and the wisdom. And this particular goddess that I am going to pray to is known as Mahalakshmi. She is the great goddess of wealth, not of bank balances, but of the spiritual wealth, which is the true treasure of human beings. And she is portrayed seated on a great white lotus. The lotus is born in the darkness and the muck of the underground, but comes out clear and glistening. And she is seated upon it. She is dressed in spotless white, which is the symbol of the higher consciousness. She is full-breasted and deep-naveled, because she is the world mother. She is Gaya. She is Bhavani Vasundhara. Her eyes are like lotus petals, because that in our iconography is the most beautiful shape for a woman's eyes. She is richly caparisoned. She is holding in her hands lotus flowers. As you know, the true lotus sleeps in the darkness, but when the sun rises, the lotus also opens itself to partake of the glory of the sunlight. This symbolizes the human soul, which sleeps in the darkness of ignorance, but when the sun of wisdom arises, it opens itself to partake of that glory. And she is being bathed on either side by elephants. 6 tusked elephants are bathing her on either side with ambrosia, with amrita, poured from golden jars. So you have this beautiful image. I suggest you take your mind on that, the greatest photograph ever taken, the first NASA photograph of planet Earth. That fabulous. You know, we are the only generation that has ever seen the Earth. There may have been great philosophers, nobody has seen what the Earth looked like until that photograph was taken. And that photograph should hang in every school room. It should hang in every campus. If you imagine that, and on that you project the great image of this goddess seated there, you have the waters from which all life began, you have the plant life, you have the animal life, and you have there the great goddess. And the prayer to her is, may she give us the compassion, the wisdom, and the knowledge to confront the problems that we face and move both inwardly and outwardly towards our true spiritual goal. And the prayer is like this. Yasa padmasanastha vipulakati padma patrayatakshi gambhira vartanabhi sanvaranamita shubhravasturottariya lakshmir divyahi gajendrihi manigan khachiti snapita he mukumbhe nityam sa padmahasta tavastu grahe sarva mangalya. Thank you.